There's a moment I keep returning to. Not the day I solved the problem. Not the day they offered me the job. Not even the day they let me go. The moment I keep returning to is a Tuesday evening in March, around 9:30 at night, when the building was almost empty and I was pushing a mop down the main corridor of the 4th floor of Meridian Systems. That specific silence that only exists in office buildings after hours. The air conditioning hum, the carpet smelling of coffee. The last few overhead lights buzzing at a frequency you can almost hear if the rest of the world is quiet enough. I stopped in front of the glass wall of the main conference room. Inside, 4 engineers were still at the whiteboard. They'd been there since 6. I could see the frustration in how they stood. The way one of them, a tall guy in a gray hoodie, kept erasing and rewriting the same cluster of nodes on the diagram. The way another had pulled her chair back from the table and was just staring at the ceiling with her arms crossed over her chest. They were working on the routing problem. I knew what it was. I'd been listening for 3 months. I stood there with my mop in my hands, and I looked at the whiteboard through the glass, and I saw exactly what they were missing. It wasn't complex. In fact, the reason they couldn't find it was precisely because it was simple. Because engineers trained to look for elegant, layered solutions sometimes walk right past an obvious answer the way you walk past something you've seen every day until it disappears. I pushed the mop forward. I kept walking. I didn't say a word. What I want to tell you is the story of the 9 months inside that building. What I saw, what I understood, what I finally did, and what it cost me when I did it. Because what happened at Meridian Systems is a story I've been carrying for 4 years, and I need to put it somewhere outside my own head. My name is Sandra Elliott. I am 43 years old. I have a daughter named Maya who is now 11, and an ex-husband named David, who has remarried and lives in Phoenix, and a 1-bedroom apartment in a part of Seattle that real estate listings describe as up and coming, which is a phrase that means the coffee shops arrive before the rent increases, but not by much. And for 9 months, 3 nights a week, I cleaned office buildings for a company called ProClean Services. I wore a gray uniform. I had a laminated badge. I pushed a cart with a mop and 2 kinds of spray cleaner and a bag for recycling and a bag for trash. I was invisible in the way that people who maintain other people's environments are always invisible. Not because anyone was particularly unkind, but because the architecture of those spaces is designed to make certain people part of the background. I need to tell you how I got there before I can tell you what happened, because if you only know the ending, none of it makes sense. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this story from today? Leave a comment and let me know. I read every single one. And I want you to know that this community has been growing in a way that genuinely moves me. People from so many different places, different lives, different circumstances, all of them here for the same reason. If stories like this mean something to you, consider subscribing. Stay until the end of this one. Because after I finish telling you what happened to me, I want to share something with you. Something I wish someone had said to me before I made some of the decisions I made. It might be useful to you. It might be exactly what you need to hear right now. I graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in computer science in 2003. Not the top of my class, but close. I was precise, methodical, good with systems architecture. The part of engineering that involves understanding how large, complex structures communicate with themselves, where the bottlenecks form, how to design around failure. I was hired straight out of school by a mid-sized software company called Orion Technologies. I spent 8 years there. I met David at an industry conference in San Francisco in 2007. He was in sales, which felt like a different universe from engineering. But he made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months, and sometimes that's the whole story. We got married in 2010. Maya was born in 2012. By 2011, I was a senior systems architect. I had a team of 6. I had a salary I had not expected to be earning at 31, and a house with a real yard in the kind of neighborhood where people know each other's names, and a sense, quiet but constant, that I had built something solid. I want to be honest with you about what I was like then. I was good at my work. I was also, in ways I didn't fully understand at the time, not good at the parts of work that exist around the work, the politics, the visibility management, the careful tending of relationships with people above you in the organization. I believed with genuine conviction that quality spoke for itself, that if you did excellent work consistently, the institution around you would recognize and protect it. Wrong, but I didn't find out how wrong until the restructuring. In the spring of 2013, Orion Technologies was acquired. The acquiring company, a larger firm based in Austin, came in with a consultant team and a mandate to streamline operations, which is the corporate language for a process that from the inside feels like someone walking through a building and deciding which walls are load-bearing and which can come down. My entire division was eliminated in the second round of cuts. 14 people. 3 years of work on a network routing architecture that had been 9 months from deployment. I was 33 years old with a 1-year-old daughter and a mortgage and a professional identity that had just been removed from the building by a consultant from Austin who had never met me. I want to tell you something about what that period felt like, because I think it's important to the rest of the story. It didn't feel catastrophic at first. In the first few weeks, I genuinely believed it was a temporary setback, that my skills were specific and demonstrable, and the market would recognize them quickly. I sent applications, I had conversations, I updated the resume, and then the months started passing. David and I were not in a good place by the time of the layoff. We had been in a quiet, sustained kind of difficulty for about a year, the kind where no single conversation is the problem, but the accumulation of small distances eventually becomes a distance that is very hard to cross. The job loss didn't cause the end of our marriage, but it occupied whatever space might have been available for repairing it. By early 2014, we had agreed to separate. He moved to Phoenix for a regional sales role. We arranged shared custody of Maya, though practically, because of the distance and her age, she stayed with me and he flew up once a month. I burned through the severance faster than I expected. I freelanced where I could. I took a contract that fell through. I took another that paid a fraction of what I'd been earning and required me to pretend that it didn't. Maya was 2 and then 2.5 and then 3. And she needed things constantly in the way that small children need things, not extravagant things, but steady, daily things. And I found myself doing math in the middle of the night that I had never expected to be doing. By the fall of 2015, I had been out of the industry for 2.5 years. The gap on my resume had become the thing interviewers asked about first. Technology moves fast. 2.5 years in systems architecture is not an eternity, but it is long enough for the specific language of the field to have shifted enough that you have to spend 6 months updating yourself before you can credibly discuss where you were. I was doing that updating in the margins of other things, late at night, during Maya's nap times, during the 2 hours between her bedtime and mine. And I took the cleaning job because it paid reliably, and because the hours, 3 evenings a week starting at 7, fit around Maya's schedule and the after-school program, and because the woman who ran the ProClean Services intake, a small and efficient woman named Carolyn who had been doing the job for 15 years, did not ask about my career history and did not require a resume. She handed me a gray uniform and a laminated badge and a cart and said the most important thing is thoroughness. She said clients notice dust on baseboards more than they notice anything else. She said if you're unsure about something, don't guess. Ask. I said I understood. Meridian Systems occupied floors 3, 4, and 5 of a glass and steel building in South Lake Union, Seattle's tech corridor, the neighborhood that had rebuilt itself around Amazon and the ambition that followed Amazon the way certain birds follow ships. I was assigned to floors 4 and 5. Floor 3 had a separate cleaning crew, which I never met. The first time I walked into the 4th floor after hours, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Recognition. Not personal recognition. I didn't know anyone there and they didn't know me. But the space itself was familiar in the way that all engineering environments are familiar to people who've spent years inside them. The whiteboards, the sticky note clusters, the dual monitor setups, the specific kind of organized mess that accumulates around a problem someone is actively working on. Printouts annotated in 3 colors, architectural diagrams taped to the glass, a coffee mug being used as a paperweight on a stack of technical specs. I cleaned around it. That's the discipline of the job. You maintain the environment without disturbing the work. You learn to read a desk the way you learn to read any territory. What is sacred? What is clutter? What exists in a state of intentional disorder that must not be resolved? I was very good at reading Meridian's 4th floor within the first 2 weeks. What I want to be clear about is that I was not eavesdropping in the dramatic sense. I was not pressing my ear to doors or lingering outside meeting rooms with a purpose. I was cleaning. I was there, working, in a space where conversations happened. And because I was part of the background, because my uniform and my cart placed me in a category that the people in those rooms had long ago learned to unconsciously exclude from their attention, those conversations happened around me rather than pausing for me. This is not a criticism. It is simply the reality of how certain people become invisible in certain spaces. And once you understand that you are invisible, you have a choice. You can experience that invisibility as a wound, or you can experience it as a kind of freedom. I chose, gradually and then deliberately, to experience it as a kind of freedom. I first heard about the routing problem in October. 2 engineers, a man named Garrett, stocky, mid-30s, with the specific intensity of someone who eats lunch at his desk because he genuinely forgets to stop working, and a woman named Priya, tall and angular with reading glasses she pushed up into her hair when she was thinking. We're standing outside the conference room on the 4th floor, talking in the kind of shorthand that people use when they've been working on the same problem for too long. I was wiping down the glass partition behind them. The routing problem, as I pieced it together over the following weeks, was this. Meridian's core product was a logistics management platform, a system that coordinated delivery routing for mid-sized regional carriers. The platform had a bottleneck in its real-time routing recalculation module. When a certain volume threshold was crossed, roughly 1,400 simultaneous active routes, the recalculation latency spiked in a way that cascaded through the system. It didn't crash. It just slowed. And in logistics, a slow routing recalculation at peak volume is not a minor inconvenience. It is the kind of problem that costs clients money and erodes confidence, and eventually causes a company the size of Meridian to lose contracts. The engineering team had been working on it for 7 months. I knew the architecture class of the problem within 2 weeks of overhearing the initial conversations. It was a resource allocation issue at the recalculation layer. The system was attempting to process all affected routes simultaneously at threshold volume instead of implementing a priority queue with dynamic re-ranking. The fix wasn't a fundamental redesign. It was a targeted modification to how the recalculation module handled competing requests under load. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I am not telling you I was smarter than Garrett and Priya. I am not telling you the solution was obvious and they were incompetent. What I am telling you is that I had a specific background in exactly this class of architectural problem, and that perspective, when you're carrying it, allows you to see certain shapes quickly. They may have arrived at the same solution the following week, the following month. I don't know. What I know is what I heard. And what I heard, week after week through October and November and into December, was a team cycling through increasingly complex proposed solutions because the simple one had become invisible to them. There's a cognitive phenomenon in engineering, in any focused technical work, where the longer you work on a problem, the more you invest in it being difficult, and the difficulty begins to feel like evidence that you're working on something serious. Simple solutions start to feel like they can't be right, because if they were right, someone would have found them already. I pushed my cart past the conference room 3 nights a week, and I watched the whiteboard diagrams grow more elaborate, and I kept my thoughts in my own head. I want to ask you something, because I've thought about this a lot in the 4 years since. What would you have done? If you were in my position, if you saw the answer, if you were certain about it, but you were the woman with the mop and not the woman with the badge, would you have said something? And if you would have, how? In what words? To whom? I didn't know the answer to those questions in December. I thought about them every night on the 40-minute bus ride home. Maya would be asleep by the time I got there, and I would check on her. She sleeps with one arm thrown over her head, always since she was an infant. And then I would sit in the kitchen and think about what I was doing with the knowledge I was carrying. Here I need to tell you something I haven't told many people. Something that makes the rest of this story more complicated than it might otherwise seem. In November, about 6 weeks into working the Meridian floors, I was cleaning the 5th floor, the executive level, and I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Not deliberately. I was emptying the recycling bin beside the printer in the hallway outside the CFO's office, and the top layer of papers had not been shredded before being recycled, and I saw the header of a document before I understood what I was looking at. I didn't read it. I put the papers in the recycling bag, I finished the floor and I went home. But I had seen the header, and the header told me that Meridian Systems was in active acquisition discussions with a company called Carlisle Infrastructure Partners. And I had been in the industry long enough to know that when a logistics software company is being evaluated for acquisition, the unresolved performance issues in its core product are precisely the kind of thing that can depress a valuation significantly. The routing problem wasn't just a technical problem, it was a business problem. And the people working on it, down on the 4th floor with their whiteboards and their frustration, may not have known exactly how much was riding on their solution. I went home that night and sat in my kitchen for 2 hours. The thing I kept thinking about was not Meridian's acquisition. The thing I kept thinking about was Maya, asleep down the hall, and the fact that I had been out of the industry in any meaningful capacity for 2.5 years, and that the gap was widening rather than narrowing, and that the math I was doing in the middle of the night was not getting any easier. I want to be honest about my motivations. I did not decide to share what I knew purely out of altruism. I decided because I was 35 years old and I had a daughter and a gap in my resume, and I had been carrying a solution to a significant problem for 3 months while pretending I didn't know it. I made a decision, but I didn't make the obvious decision. I made the careful one. I went home that night and I opened my laptop and I wrote it out. Not a solution document, not a proposal. A clean, precise technical analysis of the routing recalculation problem and the architectural modification that would address it. I spent 3 nights writing it. I was careful to be exact, not overclaiming, not hedging. Just the problem, the diagnosis, the solution, and a brief note about my background and how I had come to be working on the 4th floor of their building. I printed it out. I put it in an envelope, and the next Tuesday night, after the floor was clean and everyone had gone home, I left it on the desk of the head of engineering. His name was Marcus Webb. I knew this from the nameplate on his door. I had cleaned his office every Tuesday for 3 months. I knew he drank his coffee black and kept a photograph of 2 kids, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10, on the left side of his monitor. I knew he wrote his to-do list on physical paper and crossed items off in a specific order that suggested he prioritized completion over importance. I knew his desk was messy in a way that meant he was thinking hard about things, not in a way that meant he was disorganized. I left the envelope on the center of his desk, weighted down by a stapler so it wouldn't be missed. I wrote his name on the front in my clearest handwriting. Then I went home. And I waited. For 11 days, nothing happened. I went in on Tuesday. The envelope was gone from his desk. Nothing had replaced it. I cleaned the floor and went home. I went in on Thursday. Nothing. Friday. Nothing. I told myself various things during those 11 days. That he had thrown it away. That he had found it strange and unsettling, a cleaning worker leaving a technical document on his desk, and had mentioned it to HR and I was about to be fired. That he had read it and dismissed it. That he had read it and recognized it and was trying to figure out what to do with the information. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friend Karen, who knew about the job and was quietly horrified on my behalf. Not my mother, who called every Sunday and always asked about the job search in a tone that meant she was worried but was trying not to show it. Certainly not David, who had his own life in Phoenix and with whom my conversations had narrowed over the years to the necessary logistics of co-parenting.
On the 12th day, I arrived at the building at 7 as usual, and Carolyn from ProClean Services called me before I went up to the floors. She said Meridian had requested that I not continue my assignment there. My heart went somewhere cold and small in my chest.
She said it wasn't a complaint. She said Meridian had requested me specifically, that someone there had asked if I was available for a different kind of engagement. She said she didn't know what that meant, and it wasn't really ProClean's business model, and I should talk to them directly if I was interested, but that she wanted to let me know before I went in. I stood in the lobby of the building with my cart and my uniform, and I thought, this is either very good or very bad. I went up to the 4th floor. I didn't go to the cleaning supply closet. I walked down the main corridor toward the glass conference room. Marcus Webb was standing at the door. He was in his early 40s, medium height, with close-cropped gray-brown hair and the kind of face that processes things carefully before expressing them. He was holding my envelope, not the original, a copy, it looked like, with handwritten notes in the margins. He said, "Sandra Elliott." I said yes. He said, "You wrote this?" I said yes. There was a pause that lasted long enough for me to understand that he had verified it, that he had read it carefully enough to know that someone had written it who understood the architecture and had looked into who I was before this moment. He said, "I'd like you to come in and sit down." We talked for 2 hours that first morning. Just the two of us, in his office, with the door closed. I sat in the chair across from his desk in my gray pro-clean uniform, and I told him my background, the degree, the 8 years at Orion, the restructuring, the years since. And he listened in the specific way that engineers listen when they're evaluating whether what they're hearing is technically credible, not skeptically, precisely. He asked me 3 technical questions about the solution I had proposed. They were good questions, the kind that probe the edges of a proposed architecture where it might fail under unexpected conditions. I answered them. He wrote notes. At the end he said, "I want to be clear about what I can and can't offer right now. I want to bring this to our VP of Engineering and to HR. I'd like you to meet with a few members of the team. I can't promise anything beyond that conversation." I said I understood. I said that was more than I had when I walked in. He almost smiled. He said he'd be in touch within the week. He was. 4 days later, I received an email at the personal address I had included in my document. It was from the head of HR, a woman named Diane Forsyth, and it asked if I would be available for a formal interview. I sat at my kitchen table reading that email for 5 minutes before I moved. Then I went to Maya's room. She was doing homework, lying on her stomach on the floor with her colored pencils arranged in a row. And I sat down beside her, and she looked up at me with the expression she uses when she's trying to decide if what I'm about to say is good news or bad news. She was 7 then, already uncannily good at reading me. I said, "Something might be happening, baby. I don't know yet, but something might be happening." She looked at me for a moment and then went back to her drawing. She said, "Okay, Mom." That was enough. That was exactly enough. The interview process at Meridian was 3 rounds. The first was with Diane Forsyth in HR, a standard behavioral interview, professional and unhurried, during which I was aware at all times of the gap in my resume and the circumstances under which I had come to their attention. Diane was in her late 40s, professionally warm, with a quality of careful neutrality that I recognized as the specific skill of someone whose job requires them to evaluate people without visibly doing so. She asked about the gap. I answered honestly. I said I had been primary caregiver for my daughter following a separation, and that the combination of that responsibility and a difficult job market for the specific architecture specialty I worked in had extended the gap longer than I had intended. She wrote something and moved on. The second round was with Marcus Webb and 2 members of the engineering team, Garrett, whom I had watched at the whiteboard for months and who visibly found the situation strange in a way he was trying to be professional about, and a quieter engineer named Ben, who asked the most technically precise questions of anyone I spoke with during the process, and whose approval I sensed mattered most to Marcus. I should tell you something about that room. I had cleaned it. I had wiped down that table and those chairs and the whiteboard on the wall behind Marcus's head. The diagram that was still in the upper left corner of that whiteboard, a partial network graph with a red question mark beside one node. I had looked at it so many times over the previous months that I could have reproduced it from memory. I don't know if that gave me an advantage. I know it gave me a kind of steadiness, because the room had no power over me that I hadn't already chosen to give it. Garrett asked me, at one point, how I had identified the issue from the outside. His tone was professional, but I could hear something underneath it. Not hostility exactly, but the specific discomfort of someone who has been working on a problem for months and has just been told that someone he never registered as a colleague had seen the solution. I said, "I've worked on this class of problem before. Once you've seen how a priority queue failure cascades under load in a routing architecture, you recognize the shape of it. The whiteboard diagrams were visible from the corridor." He nodded. He wrote something. The third round was with the VP of Engineering, a woman named Catherine Park. She was in her late 30s, precise and compact, with the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. She spent most of our conversation not asking about the technical solution. She had clearly already accepted it was sound, but about something harder to assess. She said, "I need to understand how you think about working in an environment where some people will find your presence here unusual." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "I've spent the last 2 years being invisible in environments where I had more expertise than most of the people in the room. I'm used to the discomfort being on their side rather than mine." She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "That's the right answer." 2 weeks later, Diane Forsyth called me with an offer. Contract specialist, systems architecture, with a 6-month initial engagement and the possibility of conversion to a staff role. The compensation was a significant step down from where I had been at Orion, but it was more money than I had earned in any month in the previous 2 years. I accepted on the phone without negotiating. Later, Karen told me I should have negotiated. She was right. But at the time, with Maya's art supplies on the kitchen table and the rent due in 11 days, the ability to stop doing the math in the middle of the night felt worth more than any incremental difference I might have extracted. I started in February. I wore different clothes to the building and took the elevator to the 4th floor and sat at a desk that had been set up near the window. And the people who passed me in the corridor were the same people I had cleaned around for 9 months. Most of them handled it well. Priya, the engineer with the reading glasses, came to my desk on my second day and said, with genuine directness, "I just want to say that I think what you did was impressive, not the technical part. The part where you made a decision and acted on it. Garrett took longer. He was not unkind, but there was a period of several weeks where I could feel him deciding whether to be bothered by the situation, and I gave him the space to make that decision without pressuring it. By March, he had made it, and after that, he was fine. He was actually, by the end, one of the people I worked with most naturally. The routing problem itself took 6 weeks to resolve from the point of my joining, not because the fix was complex, it wasn't, but because any modification to production architecture requires careful testing, rollback planning, stage deployment. I was involved in every stage. I wrote a significant portion of the implementation documentation. When the deployment went out in mid-March and the latency metrics came back clean, routing recalculation at peak volume performing within acceptable parameters for the first time in over a year, there was a quiet satisfaction in the engineering room that I was part of. Marcus sent an email to the team that afternoon. He named me in it. That was not a small thing. I should tell you about the acquisition, because it matters to what comes next. In April, 3 weeks after the deployment, Meridian Systems announced it had entered into a formal acquisition agreement with Carlyle Infrastructure Partners. The terms were not public, but from the internal communication that followed, the kind of careful, calibrated optimism that organizations produce when they want people to feel stable rather than anxious, I could read the shape of the outcome. The routing problem had been resolved at a meaningful moment. I understood, with a precision I found uncomfortable, exactly what my work had been worth to this transaction in ways that were not reflected in my compensation. I pushed that thought to the side. I had been hired for a 6-month contract. I had 4 months left. I would do good work, and then, at the end, we would have a conversation about what came next. The conversation about what came next happened in late June, about 3 weeks before the end of my contract. Marcus called me into his office. He was direct, which I respected. He said the acquisition integration was creating some structural changes to the engineering organization. He said the routing work had been exceptional. He said he wanted to be honest with me. The new structure didn't have an obvious home for the contract role I was currently in, and the conversion to staff that had been discussed as a possibility was no longer on the table in the same form. I asked what was on the table. He paused. Not for long. He said there was a potential extension of the contract for another 3 months, at a reduced rate, to support the integration documentation. I looked at him. He was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He was a man operating inside a system that was making decisions faster than any individual could redirect them, and he was delivering information he had probably not been comfortable receiving himself. But he was delivering it, and the information was, "You solved the problem, we needed to solve the problem. The problem is now solved, and we have restructured around the solution in a way that no longer requires you." I said, "I appreciate you being direct about this." He said, "I'm sorry, Sandra, for what it's worth." I said, "It's worth something." I meant it. I went back to my desk. I sat there for the rest of the afternoon. I did my work. At 5 o'clock, I gathered my things and I went home. And I picked up Maya from after school and we had dinner. And I helped her with her reading homework and I put her to bed. And then I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet and I did 2 things. The first thing I did was allow myself to feel it, fully. Not the anger. The anger came later, and it was clean when it did. What I felt first was something more like grief. The specific grief of someone who has been given something real and had it taken back before they could build on it. I had been inside that building for 9 months before anyone saw me, and 5 months after they saw me, they had found a way not to see me again. The second thing I did was open my laptop. I want to be careful about how I tell you this next part, because there is a version of it that sounds like revenge, and that is not what it was. Revenge would have meant I did this to hurt Meridian. What I did because I had spent the better part of a decade watching systems, technical systems, organizational systems, operate in ways that produced a specific kind of outcome for a specific kind of person. And I had finally reached a point where staying quiet about it felt like complicity rather than professionalism. I had kept records, not the way Richard Calloway kept records in his little notebook. I wasn't that calculating. But I had kept the technical documentation I had written. I had kept the emails. I had kept the thread of communications around the deployment and the specific attributions of the work. I had, without fully knowing why, kept the original envelope I had put on Marcus Webb's desk, my handwritten address on the front, the document inside still crisp. What I wrote that night was an account. Not a legal document. I am not an attorney and I wasn't pretending to be. An account of what had happened, precisely and without dramatization. The circumstances under which I had come to their building, the work I had done, the offer that had been made, and the terms under which it was being withdrawn. The timeline of the acquisition and the timeline of my contract laid side by side. I didn't send it anywhere immediately. I finished it at midnight, and I read it twice, and I went to bed. The next morning I called Karen. Karen had been my closest friend since the Orion years. She had watched the whole arc of what had happened to me since the restructuring, and she had the specific combination of outrage on my behalf and practical clarity that I needed in that conversation. I read her what I had written. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should send this somewhere it will be read." I had been thinking about where. I knew 2 tech journalists, not well, but well enough. There was a reporter at a trade publication called Cascade Tech Review, a woman named Alicia Reyes who covered labor and workforce issues in the Seattle tech sector, and who had written a piece 3 years earlier that I had saved because it described, with uncomfortable accuracy, the pattern I had experienced, the industry's selective amnesia about experienced workers who had been displaced, and the specific way that amnesia operated along the lines of visibility. I emailed Alicia Reyes. She responded within 4 hours. She asked if we could talk the following day. What happened after that moved faster than I had anticipated. Alicia was careful and thorough. She spent 2 weeks talking to me, reviewing the documentation, reaching out to Meridian for comment. Meridian's communications team issued a standard response about valuing all contributors and honoring all contractual obligations, which was true, in the narrow sense that they had honored the terms of the contract. What the response didn't address was the larger question Alicia was asking, which was not about the contract but about the system. The piece ran in Cascade Tech Review on a Wednesday morning in mid-July. It was not a hit piece. Alicia was too careful a journalist for that, and I had not wanted a hit piece. What it was very precisely, was a documented account of a pattern. My story was the central narrative. But Alicia had found 4 other people, 3 women and 1 man, different ages, different specialties, who had experienced versions of the same arc, displaced, returned in a diminished capacity, used for a specific purpose, and then released when the purpose was complete. She didn't name it. She let the pattern name itself. The piece was shared widely enough that by Thursday morning I had received 11 emails from people I didn't know. By Friday I had received 43. Some of them were from people who wanted to tell me they had experienced the same thing. Some of them were from engineers and recruiters who had read the piece and had questions or context or connections they wanted to offer. 2 of them were from attorneys who specialize in tech employment cases, who said that if I was interested in discussing the situation further, they were available. 1 of them was from a company called Northgate Systems, a logistics software firm based in Portland, who said they had read the piece and that they were specifically looking for someone with my architecture background, and they would like to have a conversation. 2 of them were from attorneys who specialize in tech employment cases, who said that if I was interested in discussing the situation further, they were available. 1 of them was from a company called Northgate Systems, a logistics software firm based in Portland, who said they had read the piece and that they were specifically looking for someone with my architecture background, and they would like to have a conversation. I called Northgate Systems the following Monday. I want to tell you one more thing about what happened at Meridian before I finish this story, because I think it matters. About 3 weeks after the piece ran, I received an email from Marcus Webb. A personal email, not a company account. It was short. He said he had read the article. He said he had known, when he made that offer in June, that it wasn't right. He said he had argued against it internally and lost the argument, and that he had delivered the decision anyway because that was his role, and that he had been thinking since then about what it means to be complicit in something you know is wrong, because the alternative is to step outside the system that employs you. He said he didn't know if that context changed anything for me. He said he hoped things went well. I read that email several times. I wrote back. I said the context matters. I said, I know you didn't make the decision alone. I said, I hope you find the line between the arguments you lose and the ones that require you to do something else. He didn't write back after that. I didn't expect him to. I am telling you this story in the present tense of my life, which means I can tell you how it ends, or at least how it has ended so far. I joined Northgate Systems on a staff contract in September. 6 months later, they offered me a permanent role. I am now a senior systems architect there. I have a team of 3. The work is good, the building is less shiny than Meridian's, but the problems are real and the people are genuine, and I go home at the end of the day feeling like I know what I did. Maya is 11 now. She knows the broad shape of the story. Not every detail, but enough. Last year, for a school project, she had to interview a family member about a challenge they had overcome. She interviewed me. I sat across from her at the kitchen table while she asked her questions in the careful, slightly formal way she takes on when something matters to her. And I answered honestly, and at the end she wrote in her notebook for a while before she looked up and said, "So the thing you did, leaving the letter on the desk, was that scary?" I thought about it. I said, it was the least scary option that was still honest. She looked at me for a moment. She wrote that down. I don't know if she understood what I meant. I wasn't sure I fully understood it myself when I said it. But the more I sit with it, the more I think that is the truest thing I know about what happened inside that building. Before I let you go, I want to say something to you directly, because I know that some of you watching this are in a version of the situation I was in. Maybe you're carrying knowledge that the people around you don't know you have. Maybe you've been displaced from a career, from a role, from a version of yourself, and you're doing the math in the middle of the night and wondering if the gap is too wide to cross. Maybe you're inside an organization right now and you can see something clearly that the people with the titles can't see, and you're trying to decide whether saying so is worth what it might cost you. Here is what I would tell Sandra Elliott of 2015, if I could go back and sit across from her at that kitchen table while Maya slept down the hall. I would tell her this: your invisibility is not evidence of your diminishment. It is evidence of the failure of the system to see you. Those are different things, and you need to be clear about which one is true. The decision to act, to put something you know into a form that cannot be ignored, is not a gamble. It is the only alternative to a slow accumulation of silence that will cost you more, over time, than any single risk. And here is the hardest thing. The thing I wish someone had said plainly. The people who benefit from your work will not always protect you. Some of them will. Marcus Webb argued for me and lost the argument and told me so afterward. That matters. But the institution around those people has its own logic, and that logic is not always aligned with fairness or recognition or the acknowledgement of what you actually contributed. So you document. You keep what you write. You don't wait for the institution to see you clearly. You create the conditions under which it becomes impossible to look away. And when those conditions fail, as they sometimes will, you take what you built and you find the room where it's recognized and you keep going. That is not a perfect ending. I know it isn't. But it is an honest one. And after everything that happened inside that building, after the mop and the cart and the envelope and the conference rooms and the contract and the article and the email from Marcus at his personal address at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, honest is the thing I am most grateful to still be. Thank you for staying until the end.